Hey everyone, welcome to another one of my YouTube live streams. I am so happy all of you could come. It really means the world to me to have a nice turnout of people at my live stream events. And to have a lot of people actually show up and stay and listen to my work. This time I'm going to be reading from Was I Ever Normal, my novel in prose poetry that tells the story of Cassie, a young girl afflicted with childhood-onset schizoaffective disorder that she is so desperate to hide from everyone she knows that she creates an intricate web of lies so tangled that when she tells the truth, no one believes her. This book is coming out in paperback in bookstores all over the country, as well as available for sale online and in ebook format at the end of January. The estimated date of publication is January 24th. But that's just an estimate. It depends how long it takes the page designers to get the page proofs to me and for me to approve them. Otherwise, it'll come out in the beginning of February at the very, very latest. Without any more introduction, so it's not coming out as an Audible book. It's not going to be an audiobook. So I will continue to read chapters of it live streamed. For those of you who want to hear it read aloud and want to see me read it aloud, I'll continue to do that till the end of the book, so people can have that opportunity. But without any further ado, I will begin reading Chapter 14 of Was I Ever Normal? School started, and I put on my back-to-school clothes, gathered up everything on my list of supplies, and climbed into the car. The kids were all the same kids. I had all the same teachers, and all the same classrooms, and all the same difficulties. Michelle was even worse than ever. Her mother had somehow found out that I'd been at a partial hospital program for kids with emotional difficulties. Soon, everyone at school knew that I'd been crazy again. The adults never seemed to be able to do anything about the teasing that they never seemed to notice. I'd given up on the idea that adults could help. No one really seemed to be able to help me. And my deepest fear was that life would continue to be just one big mass of pain and challenges that lasted forever. My parents understood a little bit. At least once a week, my parents would get a call from Mrs. Johnson that I was distraught and inconsolable and needed to be picked up. Sometimes my dad would take me to Starbucks after he picked me up. He would buy me a caramel frappuccino and try to get me to talk to him. I could tell him about my feelings of sadness, but never about the voices that haunted the backgrounds of my consciousness. After the drink and talk, Dad would either drop me back off at school or take me home to safety. Other times, my mom or dad would pick me up and take me back to the crisis center, where a crisis worker would evaluate me, decide I didn't need a hospital, and send me home. Part of me was starting to want to be back in the hospital, where I wouldn't have to go to school. I had started cutting again. At first, my parents didn't know, but soon I started to cut in school too. At first, it would just be in the bathroom, but then I started doing it in the classroom too. I only did it when the voices that were demanding the blood got so loud that I couldn't even hear anything else. I only did it with pins or needles, and I never drew too much blood. But the other kids saw me. They were shocked and horrified, and immediately told the teacher. The teacher sent me to go sit with Mrs. Johnson. Mrs. Johnson sent me home. My parents sent me to a new therapist. My new therapist didn't really listen to me. I cried when I had to stop seeing Liz, who had been my therapist for a year. I loved her and had really connected with her. But my parents had decided that Liz obviously wasn't helping enough if I was still cutting. My new therapist's name was Sandra. She talked a lot, but half the time the voices would be too loud and would overwhelm her voice and drown it out. Fellingham had gotten quieter during the summer, but was now back full force. He was louder and angrier than ever. The narrator was more obnoxious, and the weird images came more frequently. I didn't trust Sandra at all. Definitely not enough to tell her about the voices and images. I stopped going to school. I don't know if they told my parents that they didn't want me back, or if my parents just thought enough was enough. At first, my parents said they were looking for a new school for me to go to, but soon they brought up the topic of homeschooling. I loved that idea. Anne and Christine were homeschooled. Why couldn't I do it too? Sandra wasn't really sure if homeschooling was a good idea or not, but I guess she didn't protest too much because soon my parents were buying books and getting me all set up to learn at home. Homeschooling seemed to avert what had looked like an impending crisis. I got to learn at my own pace with my own books, and 2 days a week, Christine and Anne came over so I could tutor them in math. After we finished our assignments, we would hang out for hours, just being kids, having fun. That was my favorite part of the week. I also took piano and Spanish lessons with a nice woman who lived a few streets away. She knew about my issues and let me talk to her when I was stressed. I never told her about the voices, but sometimes I vented to her about my intrusive memories about of the hospital, the itch of agitation twisting in knots inside me, and the suffocating depression that occasionally billowed in. She would tell me about her autoimmune-caused arthritis and her issues with her blood sugar levels. She called it reactive hypoglycemia. We would commiserate with each other while playing piano and speaking and writing in Spanish. On Tuesdays, I went to a group where a bunch of homeschoolers and their parents did Zoom meetings with a bunch of scientists in Antarctica, and they taught us about geology, biology, physics, and chemistry, and what it's like in one of the coldest places on Earth. Life felt tolerable a lot of the time, and for me, that was enough. Then family therapy started, and my roller coaster life started free-falling again. Only my harness and seatbelt wasn't fastened appropriately. Sandra decided that we needed family therapy. She also decided that she would be our family therapist, in addition to being my personal therapist. Family therapy consisted of my parents bringing up things I did at home that they didn't like, and Sandra trying to help us come up with ways for me to change my behavior so that my parents could be happier. My parents brought up the way I cried too easily. They brought up the way I sometimes would stop eating for days. They brought up my occasional cutting. Sandra told them to set firmer limits with me. She told them to say no to me more often. She told them to give me consequences for my behavior, like taking away my favorite teddy bears for a week. If they found out that I'd been cutting myself, not being able to hang out with Anne and Christine for a week if I was crying too much and not calming down for longer than an hour or two. Needing to be in my room for an hour after meals if I refused to eat enough at family meal times. I generally spent most of family therapy crying because from the words coming out of my parents' mouths, I knew they hated me. I generally left family therapy feeling like a failure because I couldn't act or behave or be the person that everyone else thought I should be, and couldn't somehow immediately snap my fingers and change. Everyone said that I cried too much. I tried so hard not to. I promised myself I would stop crying, but then I would see the eyes in the walls staring at me as I got changed into my pajamas, and I would cry because I was too scared and felt too violated. Or I would hear Fellingham ranting on and on about what a failure I was, or what he was saying rang so true that I couldn't help but cry. Or one of my parents would make a face at me, and I would see how much I was disappointing them, and I would cry because of how terrible I felt for doing that to them. I tried to eat at the times my parents wanted me to, but some days Fellingham would tell me that I would be punished if I ate, and the narrator would tell me that I was refusing to eat, and then it would be too much and too hard to eat, and I would have to tell my parents I couldn't eat. Then there was the cutting. I wanted to stop it so badly. I hated how upset it made everyone around me, but I also hated getting sucked in. Fellingham and the narrator would suck me in when I didn't do what they told me to do. Like if they told me to cut and I didn't, or if they told me not to eat something and I ate it anyway, a fog would envelop me. Cold fingers of death would reach down my spine. The real world would dissolve away, and I would have no awareness of it. The non-stop screaming and moaning and sound of chains would be all that I could hear until they released me from their world. My parents began punishing me, just like Sandra told them to. Losing the stuffed animals was the worst ever, because I clung to the stuffed toys like safety nets. I took care of them like they were alive, and they were the only ones who knew all of my truths. I felt intense love when I held them. I felt like they loved me back as well. When I held them, I could feel my anxiety levels drop down significantly. I didn't have to worry about not knowing what to say to my teddy bears, or worry about feeling socially awkward. My teddy bears just loved me no matter what. Sandra thought the teddy bears were silly. She thought I needed to act more my age. I hated her for that. I hated her for a lot. Things stayed the same for a while. I hung out with Anne and Christine, as long as I wasn't being punished by my parents, which was often. I continued to be homeschooled. I continued to see Sandra twice a week, once with my family, once by myself. I continued to hate Sandra. I continued to hear voices fairly often. Every day was a struggle for me. The lies to hide my other reality piled up and built a wall between me and my parents. When I stopped eating halfway through the year I was 11, my parents thought it was because I was having a relapse of my eating disorder. Sandra assumed the same thing. I played along with them. I knew they wouldn't understand if I told them the truth. That I couldn't eat because I wasn't pure, and a woman dressed in white had told me I would be pure if I starved myself down lower than a preschooler's weight. Some days I got so hungry I would feel like my stomach was eating itself from the inside out. Some days I got so dizzy I would have to grab onto a nearby surface just to stay upright and conscious. Some days I felt so tired and weak I wanted to just collapse in a pile and sleep forever. but I could feel the purity spreading through my body, and I could hear Para congratulating me for doing a good job. The praise felt so good. It had been so long since an adult had told me I was doing a good job, so I continued to starve myself and watched my clothes get bigger and bigger and my body shrink smaller and smaller. My parents brought me to a special doctor. She was an adolescent medicine doctor that had a lot of experience with eating disorders. Her name was Dr. Kimmons. When she weighed me, she shook her head. "You have ketones in your urine. Your body temperature and blood pressure are both too low, and you definitely don't weigh enough for someone your age," she told me, and I just nodded. I told her I just had to get a little bit thinner, and then I would start eating again. I didn't tell her the part about getting pure. I didn't tell her the part about Para. She looked at me and shook her head again. A lot of the girls who come to me say that, but once you get to whatever you think your goal weight is, you're just going to want to lose more, and it will just keep going on and on. You need to keep working You need to stop working on losing weight and work on getting healthy, Dr. Kimmons told me. She pulled out a can from a drawer. It was something called Boost. It looked a lot like Kinder Cow. "You have to drink at least 3 of these cans before you see me tomorrow. If you can't drink at least 3 of these, then I'll have to put an NG tube in you. Understand?" I nodded. I understood. Apparently, I had graduated from Kinder Cow to Boost. "I also want you to go back to the partial hospitalization program for a little bit." I nodded. My mom nodded. I found myself back at the partial hospital for the 3rd time. I grinned sheepishly at the staff when I returned. They were nice to me, but I was embarrassed at the fact that I couldn't survive out there in the real world better. Back at the partial hospital, I tried to talk in groups. I told people how I was scared of getting another NG tube stuck down my nose into my stomach again to feed me if I couldn't eat enough on my own, and I would hurt a lot going in and was really uncomfortable. The other kids and the staff told me to just eat. They said it like it was so easy. They made the mistake of thinking that I was like them, and I really, really wasn't. I started to try and explain about how Para would be mad at me if I ate, but then I caught myself and mumbled something vague about how I was just scared to eat. My heart was racing. I had gotten way too close to revealing the secret I had kept safely locked inside me for the last 6 years of hell. Dr. Kimmons examined me the next morning. Her nurse took my blood pressure while I was lying, sitting, and standing. She shook her head and told me to be careful when I stood up, because my blood pressure dropped every time I changed positions. The nurse took my temperature. It was still too low. She weighed me. I was suddenly acutely aware of the way all my bones stuck out like sharp angles. When Dr. Kimmons came in, she told me to sit down. "You've lost another 2 pounds, and your vital signs are still off. Your mom says you refused to drink any of the Boost yesterday. Do you remember our deal?" I nodded sadly. My heart was pounding and stuck in my throat. My breaths were coming in so fast. If it wasn't for Para reassuring me that I was a good girl, I probably would have burst out crying. The nurse came back in and told me to sit down on the examination table. I followed her directions and sat. She handed me a styrofoam cup of water and told me to sip slowly as she forced the tube in through my nose. I could feel a lot of painful pressure as the tube jammed through nasal cartilage and sinuses. I felt like I was gagging as it slid down my throat. I could feel silent, hot tears drip down my face, but I pretended I was brave and not crying. Para told me I could pull the tube out later when no one was watching me. So I stoically sat on the examination table as the nurse flushed the tube with water, using a stethoscope to check placement and make sure the tube was working. Then she put a piece of Tegaderm on my cheek to hold the tube in place. I was still shaking as my mom and I headed out of the office. That's the end of that. And thank you guys for watching. That was I Ever Normal, Chapter 14. I hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to share with your friends and subscribe to my channel, and please comment. The more subscribers I get, the better, because the more people that comment and subscribe and share my writing, the more my writing will get out there. My goal is to get as much writing out into the world as possible. I do have a terminal illness, and I'm trying to make my mark on the world with my writing. That is my goal, so that my writing can be my legacy. So please comment, share, and subscribe. I love you guys so much. Thanks for watching.